In this video, we will be going over the average rate of change. Average rate of change is the ratio of the difference of output values to the difference of the corresponding input values, which would be written as f of a minus f of b all over a minus b. And this is in function notation. This average rate of change is similar to slope, which would be y minus y over x minus x. You may use either formula to find the average rate of change. So for example 1, it says, calculate the average rate of change for this given function between x equals 1 and x equals 3. If I know x equals 1, I can take it and plug it in. So I would write 1 squared plus 6 times 1 plus 9. Type that into my calculator, enter, and we get y equals 16. Then I take my x equals 3, I plug it into my function, 3 squared plus 6 times 3 plus 9, and that answer would give me 36. Now I can substitute them into my formula, and I would do y minus y over x minus x. And just make sure you follow the same pattern. So if I do 16 minus 3 for the top, 36, then on the bottom I do 1 minus 3. If I reversed it and did 36 minus 16 for the top, the bottom would have to be 3 minus 1. Make sure you follow the same pattern. That gives us negative 20 divided by negative 2, which would equal 10 for my average rate of change. On example 2, we are given the function g of x is the average rate of change greater between these two x values or between these two. So sometimes they give us the x's in this notation, -1, 0. When they write it like this, because of these brackets, that means that this is an x and this is also an x value. So I would take these values and plug them in. So when I plug in -1 minus 3 squared minus 2, I enter that and my solution would be 14. Then I would take this 0 and plug it in for an x. And that would give us our 7 for the y values. So then you would decide your pattern. So if my pattern is 14 minus 7 for the y's, my x's would be a -1 minus 0. 14 minus 7 is 7 divided by -1 equals -7 for that average rate of change. Now it wants me to do the average rate of change from where x is a 1 to where x is a 2. So I would take that 1 and plug it in. And we get 2. Then I would take this 2 and plug it in, which gives us a -1. These are my y values. So I would do y minus my -1 all over 1 minus 2 When I have two negatives, it will become a positive, so plus sign. 2 plus 1 is 3. 1 minus 2 is -1, which is -3. When it asks you which one has a greater rate of change, it means which one is changing faster. Now, because of the negatives, they're both going down, but because 7 is the greater value, it is the greater rate of change. On example 3, we are going to copy these x values over by our table. So turn the page. And we are going to fix the table as well while we are doing this. So on the table, I'm going to cross this off and make it f of x. And then I'm going to add in a table for g of x, because that's what your homework will look like. And these are just random numbers. From my last class that they picked. All right, so on your assignment, it'll say, find the average rate of change for f between -0.75, -0.25. So this is what it would look like on your assignment. Because of the brackets, that means I know x equals -0.75 and x equals -0.25. I need to find what my y values will equal for my function. So what I would do is I would look for the column that are in the function f. So that means I would look in this column. So my x is -0.75. The function for f would be the 3.44. Then I check for this x, -0.25. Then the f function that matches with it is 8.44. Y minus y all over x minus your -0.25. These will change to become a plus sign. Two negatives make a positive, which gives us -5 divided by -0.5. When you enter that in, you get a positive 10 for the average rate of change. And that was for the function f of x. Then it'll have a second question under it that says, find the average rate of change for g between -0.75, -0.25. So once again, these brackets mean that I have my x, and then I need to find my y's. So I go through, my x is -0.75, but this time I'm looking in column G, 2. -0.25, I look at column G, and it will be a 3. Y minus y over x minus x becomes a plus sign. -1 divided by -0.5 is equal to 2. And that's the average rate of change for g of x. If it helps, you can also, if it says use function f, you can just cover up g and pretend like it's not even there, so that it's easier to pick out your numbers. Same thing if they say are using column G, just cover up that middle one and make sure you use the numbers that align. On example 4, we are going to use a graph to find the average rate of change. If I know x equals -3 and x equals -2, I go to my x-axis. Oh, I forgot. The numbering on this graph is a little weird. Every 2 is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which means this would be -1 and this would be -2, just so that we don't get confused. When x is -3, here's my x, I need to count how far up my graph goes. It goes up 2. So y would be equal to 2 when x is -3. Then when I check my x at -2, it's down 1. Then I can plug them in. Y minus y over x minus x. The negatives will become a positive. 2 plus 1 is 3 over -1, which equals -3 for the average rate of change. On example 5, I'm just going to copy over the number 1.5 and 2. I would take these values and plug them in. They should be t's. I'm going to use x. So I would have -16 times 1.5 squared plus 60, enter. Then I would go through and plug in a 2 instead, enter. And then I would do y minus y over x minus x, which would give us a positive 28 over -0.5, which would equal -56. And I'm going to double check. There's the denominator divided by -0.5 is -56 for the average rate of change.